And we continue at 1:07 in the afternoon. Talk Radio 790 KABC, the John Phillips Show, broadcasting live from the Morongo Casino Resort and Spa Living Room Studios. Mr. Randy Wang's at the sports desk in Culver City.
John, we're still covering the breaking news on Capitol Hill. The voting has begun. The vote to oust Kevin McCarthy as Speaker of the House. Currently, we're at 32 yeas and 29 nays.
And that's going to continue to go on throughout the program. And when the voting is complete, we'll bring those results to you as soon as they're made available. 800-222-KABC is the telephone number, 1-800-222-5222. It is a pleasure to welcome our next guest to the program. He is a former member of the California State Legislature representing Silver Lake. You can get him online at MikeGatto.com and follow him on Twitter at Mike Gatto. Mike Gatto, welcome.
John, it's great to be on KABC.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Let's start out with the no cash bail, which is now on the books for a second day here in Los Angeles County. This, of course, was tried up in San Francisco before, and it was one of the issues that was used against Chesa Boudin in the recall election that was successful, where he was replaced with the new district attorney, Brooke Jenkins. This subject was discussed over at the LA County Board of Supervisors, where they had a very interesting take on it. They support what's going on, but they want to make sure it's very clear to everyone out there that they didn't do it, so don't blame them. Let's listen to Hilda Solis.
And the misinformation out there right now is horrific. It's bad enough that we have people, naysayers, that just want to, ridicule any progress that we're trying to make.
What do you make of what's going on? Why won't they just come out and say, hey, this isn't going to work. We should try something different. They just want to make sure they're not the ones that are blamed.
I think that's because they know that crime is on the rise. Despite what statistics they like to throw out there, that voters recognize what they see in the streets. We see every day that there are a lot of crimes that are occurring. Things like bikes being stolen, purses being snatched, people being attacked, people disrespecting public facilities by urinating on them or defecating on them. And people are just so tired of the crimes and the lack of consequences that they're not even calling the police. And if they do call the police are not necessarily showing up, and they're certainly not charging that person. And so, you hear people say, well, crime is down. But we all know that's not the case. We know, you can fool people sometimes, but you can't fool them all of the time. And we know in our hearts and our heads that they're wrong. And so because I think they're anticipating that crime will rise due to these bail changes, they don't want to be on the record as being the genesis of these zero bail policies.
Well, and I'm sure the optics are going to be awful, because what you have now administratively, when you catch someone because they break the law, it's catch and release, and the information is not even processed to the district attorney's office or the relevant law enforcement organizations for 30 days, meaning you could break the law, get arrested, be given a court date, 4 days later, break the law again, nobody knows, they release you immediately. 4 days later, break the law again, nobody still knows, they release you immediately, and just keep it going forever.
Yeah, we saw a guy in New York City on the day that zero bail was put in place. He committed a very, very vicious hate crime. He was released immediately. On his way back from being released, he committed an identical hate crime against an identical group. I mean, this is the world that we live in with these experiments that we keep trying with criminal justice.
Why is it that they continue to press ahead? And I say that because in the 1980s, late 80s, and early 90s, it was a violent place to live in here in Southern California. And it was Polly Klaus's abduction and murder, where people said, all right, enough. And we came in with 3 strikes and you're out. and we brought in all of these gun enhancements and gang injunctions and sentencing guidelines and those sorts of things. And the crime rate really did drop. It worked. And I feel like we became a victim of our own success, where people said, oh, look at this. Crime is really low. But look at this huge population of people in prison. Why are we spending money on this when we could be spending money on education? And we went in the opposite direction, and we failed to learn the lesson of the 1980s and 1990s.
Yeah, and that's the challenge, right, is that the pendulum can swiftly move one direction or another, and it can swing very, very far. And when it moves in too far in one direction, there's always a countervailing force. And I get that. I am not of the group that says we got to lock everybody up. I think that is harmful. And I also believe that there are people in prison and in jail that genuinely can be rehabilitated, and that we should do more to get them rehabilitated. But at the same time, I also want to live in a society where there are consequences for crimes. If you commit a very, very heinous crime, you should be punished. And the problem is that when we allow the pendulum to shift so far in one direction, we don't end up with good policy. Right now, the pendulum is clearly shifted in the, let everybody free side of things. And that's not right either. You asked why it is, John. You said, well, why is that? And this is where, I hope I can offer some degree of understanding into the Democratic mindset. I was elected to the legislature. I'm a Democrat, and people might be shocked when they hear me talking about law and order that I am a Democrat. But I think there's a lot of members of the Democratic Party who they call themselves progressives, and they believe that they must make progress. The problem is that often progress is really put in quotes, and progress means running around with like a chicken with your head cut off and trying to have change for no reason other than for the sake of change. And, sometimes you have to just say, these human truths have existed for a long, long time. If you don't punish people, they will believe that there is a culture of impunity. And if there's a culture of impunity, you will have a very, very tough society to live in as a good member of society.
In San Francisco, there was a recall of their Soros district attorney, Chesa Boudin, and the recall was successful. You can't win any kind of election in any part of San Francisco unless you get Democratic voters on board. The same Democratic voters that voted him in were the ones that voted him out of office. George Gascon, who is the ideological twin of Chesa Boudin, is going to be on the ballot next year here in Los Angeles County. What are Democrats going to do with him? Because there's no way to kick him out unless Democrats turn on him. What are you hearing from other Democrats in Los Angeles County about George Gascon?
I am hearing a tremendous amount of disappointment from Democrats. And by that I mean both, people that are inside the halls of power and also regular human beings. Every week, multiple times a week, I hear from someone who says, I'm a lifelong Democrat. I believe in rehabilitation. I believe in this, but he has gone too far. And you hear that from people in the halls of power, people who are savvy, people who say things like you said, John, where they say, I don't want the pendulum to be crazy. I don't want people to be throwing everybody out of office because they're so upset. But if this thing continues, that's where we are headed. I believe personally that Democrats will unite behind an alternative. They will unite behind an alternative candidate. It's probably going to be Jeff Chemerinsky. He is a federal prosecutor who has spent his life putting gang members in prison. He knows what victims go through. He's fought very hard to put people in jail. But he's not like hey, let's lock them all up and just, govern by slogans. That's not his style. And so I think there will be an alternative candidate who emerges. It could be one of the other candidates running too. There's a number of very good candidates running. Eric Siddall is another one. There's a number of people on the ballot who I think Democrats will unite behind.
I don't know about Chemerinsky. I served on the editorial board of the Southern California News Group with his dad, and the dad was pretty far out there on the left. And based on what I've read about the son, it sounds like the son in the same place ideologically as the dad.
Well, I don't know that. I mean, I like to think that nobody is their parents, right? Everybody rebels in some way, and that there's we can never sort of hold somebody in the same guilty or responsible for what their parents have done. I can tell you that at this point, I think there's people so fed up with what they see in the streets of Los Angeles every day that they're going to look for an anybody but. And the question becomes, who is best equipped to beat this person? And that's where I base my assessment of this race. I think they're going to look for who is the front runner, who has positions that are mainstream to Los Angeles. I mean, we don't have to look that far for the playbook. As you noted, it's exactly what happened in San Francisco.
We're speaking with former California Assemblyman Mike Gatto, who you can follow on Twitter at Mike Gatto. Earlier this week, Sunday night, the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, announced his choice to take over and fill out the remaining portion of Dianne Feinstein's U.S. Senate term. And he chose LaFonza Butler, who is a former head of the SEIU here in California. She's currently a lobbyist that runs Emily's List, which is an organization that raises money for pro-choice Democratic women candidates for office. And she is a Maryland resident, or was listed as a Maryland resident and registered voter on her biographies and social media. What do you think the reaction is? What's the reaction among Democrats in California, elected Democrats in California, many of whom serve in offices where there are term limits and you kind of have to look to find out what your next move will be, and finding one of these offices that doesn't have term limits? It's very rare in California politics to find. I'm sure there are many of them here in California who wanted this seat that would then create openings from whatever seat it is that they come from, and everyone gets to move a notch up on the food chain. What do you make of his decision to give this appointment to someone who doesn't live here?
Well, there's a whole lot of jealous California politicians right now, Todd. I mean, there's the old joke, right? We used to say when I was in the legislature that every single elected official in the state, every city council member wakes up in the morning, and as he straightens his tie or as she does her hair, they say, "Good morning, Mr. Mayor." And, everybody in legislatures wakes up every morning and says, "Good morning, Mr. Speaker." And as you start to go higher, people probably say, "Good morning, Mr. or Mrs. President," right? But the reality is, Gavin Newsom, obviously he stated very early on that he wanted to make amends for previous appointments, that he was going to appoint an African-American woman. And so that immediately took several prominent Democrats out of the running, right? He couldn't appoint an Adam Schiff. He couldn't appoint a Katie Porter. And those folks have been running for Senate for a very, very long time. Does this put the Senate race into a whole new category now? I don't think so. I'm one of the group that thinks that it's very easy to underestimate how hard it is to raise money in the state of California. I realize that LaFonza Butler is a powerful fundraiser, and I realize that this is what she's done for a living for the last several years. She's raised money for a Democratic group. But to be competitive in a California statewide race, you need to raise about $15 million. And there are roughly 150 days between now and Election Day. Now, I'm a Democrat. I can't do math. But even I know that is $100,000 a day, right? Or, $100,000 a day between now and Election Day to be competitive. And that is a very, very tall order. That is a ton of money that would need to be raised. And so I think the Senate race is going to go on pretty much as planned. Now, if Ms. Butler does decide to run, and it is her prerogative, then perhaps outside spending could be relevant. And that's something that I would be watching for as the days and weeks unfold.
What do you make of Newsom's decision? Initially, he promised the candidates who are currently running for that office and their supporters and donors that he would appoint a caretaker, that they would have to make a pledge that they would not run for a full term. He reneged on that promise and said, nope, there's no restrictions, no strings attached. Whoever it is, this was before he made the announcement, whoever it is that gets the appointment will be able to run for a full term should they choose to.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a political journalist named Emily Hoban, and she wrote a piece in one of the California newspapers. I believe it was published everywhere, but I think it was maybe lead in the San Francisco Chronicle. And she wrote a piece that basically said that the governor, who I know well, and he's a very savvy politician, and he's a very charismatic politician, and he usually does not make too many mistakes. And her basic idea in this piece was that he keeps, like trying to fix the last plumbing leak, right? He appointed Alex Padilla to the Senate before, and he faced a lot of pushback from the African Americans in the Democratic Party who said you should have appointed an African American. And so he said, without really thinking, perhaps, I commit to appointing an African American woman, right? And then he said, well, I commit it'll just be a caretaker, right? And then he said, well, no, I got to go back on that, right? And perhaps he should, reconsider how fast he speaks was the thesis of this article. And, I tend to agree with that. I think normally he's very, very savvy. He would not have risen to as far as he's gotten without being that savvy. He's very politically gifted. He, usually has his finger right on the pulse. But I think here this might have been a series of, unforced errors. He could have just, he could have told people all these things behind closed doors, but he made these announcements publicly, and that perhaps was his mistake here.
Former California Assemblyman Mike Gatto. You can follow him on Twitter at Mike Gatto. Assemblyman Gatto, thanks so much for stopping by. Always a pleasure.
Thanks for having me, John.
If you'd like to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. And Randy, if you want to listen to the podcast edition of this show, that's very easy to do.
That's right. Go to KABC.com, click on podcasts. You go to the Apple Podcast app, iHeart, Spotify, search for The John Phillips Show, hit subscribe. Or even easier than all that, download the new KABC app. You can search for KABC AM 790 KABC on the Apple App Store or the Android Store. The easiest way to listen live to the stream with all of the clutter of those other apps, you go straight to this show, noon to 3, and then when it's not noon to 3, it's so easy to listen to all the podcasts of this show. So you get all the John Phillips Show all the time. And we get all the shows there. We've got Monday shows. We've got Friday shows. We've also got
Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday.
Coming up next, Randy is monitoring the vote currently taking place in the United States House of Representatives on whether or not to vacate the Speaker.
Currently, it's 196 yays, 197 yays, 186 nays. We're a few minutes away, but it looks like it's on track for Kevin McCarthy to be removed as Speaker because at least 6 Republicans are already voted to say bye-bye, and the Democrats are not helping him, despite reports of some Republicans calling Democrats begging for a vote.
And we're also receiving reports that apparently in the Democratic caucus meetings, they're not happy with Hakeem Jeffries, that I guess he's not giving them direction. And right now they're upset with him. So I guess we haven't had a fire alarm pulled today. So it's not as chaotic as it used to be.
That would be interesting if that happened before we got to 218 votes. 204, 186. It's not looking good for the Bakersfield congressman.
Imagine that. Imagine if after 6 Republicans voted against Kevin McCarthy, he screamed, "Bowman, fire alarm, now!" All right. Today is day 2 of no bail in Los Angeles County. We heard earlier from Supervisor Lindsay Horvath, and now it's time to hear from Supervisor Holly, quite frankly, Mitchell.
Oh, and Holly had a lot of things to say about this policy.
Quite frankly.
Let's hear Holly explain how the system that we had in place did not work.
I think that there is a reason that nationwide elected bodies all over this country have evaluated the bail system because the status quo was not working. It did not meet that standard of a system that was meeting the expected goal. And so I think, I'm glad it just came up, Mr. Slayton, that it's really dangerous for us to conflate bail with accountability.
Oh, there's everybody's favorite word.
That's right. And this is accountability to her. Write them a slip, tell them they'll be back in 30 days, and do absolutely nothing.
Despite the old system of, here is the crime that you committed, here's the amount of money that you're going to have to give us to convince us not to hold you until your trial. And if you do anything untoward while you're out, we keep the money. That literally was accountability.
And we'll have Dog the Bounty Hunter have a financial incentive to find you.
With accountability. I am equally offended if someone who posted bail commits another crime. This notion of...
You don't seem very offended when someone who doesn't post bail commits another crime.
No, but there's an additional penalty if someone who posted bail commits another crime.
This notion of they were released on zero bail and they committed a crime, I'm offended. I'm offended if somebody recidivates and they posted bail. That means our system is not working well. We are not...
How often does that happen?
Your mom's going to lose her house if you do that.
Reducing the incidence of crime. So this notion we have to check ourselves and help the public understand that we should not conflate bail with accountability. Bail means I had the resources to pay my way out of jail.
Or you call one of those shops on Van Nuys Boulevard.
That is the difference between someone who can and can't. It is a cash system that was not working to reduce recidivism, was not working in the way I think the general public assumed and internalized.
So the answer is let everybody out?
Here is what she's upset about. She's upset that the businessman who gets the DUI can get out, but the gang member who doesn't have financial resources has to stay in.
And so I appreciate this conversation because I think it's important that we all are educated and understand that that is not what the bail system did.
Let's hear Holly Mitchell talk with Sheriff Robert Luna about the conditions of his jail. Not the LA County jail, his jail.
Sheriff Luna, question. Because as I continue to reference our shared constituency, you are uniquely positioned in this context. You have talked about,
Wait, is she going to start kicking the trash can again?
You have talked about, from.
I don't think she's kicking the trash can, but she's umming as much as Barbara Ferrer.
What level of crime that, should result in automatic detention, and perhaps wanting more crimes added to the list. I get that. And so my question for you is, how are you balancing considerations made for, immediate crime prevention? Because we talked about really wanting to lower the incidence of crime with some really harsh realities that you and we all confront. Chronic overcrowding in your jails.
Who voted to close Men's Central Jail?
Oh, that's right. Those 5 idiots.
We are under a DOJ consent decree.
In fact, wasn't Holly in the Assembly with AB 109, which overcrowded the jails when we kicked everyone out of prison?
This is just one big incestuous cabal of awfulness.
We are under a DOJ consent decree. We heard that. The conditions in your jails.
She knows that she's in charge of the jails too, right?
She doesn't say our jails. She says your jails.
30-plus in-custody deaths. The long-term implications of trauma and the increased likelihood of...
See, people that go to jail are the real victims.
That's what she believes.
Criminal activity from prolonged periods in jail. Studies show us that. The lack of treatment, the lack of programming for people who are in the jail. How are you balancing your efforts to increase the crimes that would lead to automatic detention with these other realities of the conditions in the jail that you have the responsibility to oversee and manage?
I will never shy away from my responsibilities, but as you started your comments earlier, you emphasized what we need to do. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to start the answer by saying our jail that we all need to work on and focus on.
Good for Luna.
Yes. Your jail is how she framed it. Our jail is how he framed it.
Let's hear Holly talk about how the current system is antiquated.
So the whole pretrial release infrastructure that we're setting up is designed to help us, alleviate those pressures on an antiquated, overburdened system that is not boding well for the health and the life of those who are incarcerated in it. Or
again, her concerns are for the people who break the laws. Her concerns are not for the victims that they would continue to victimize if they let them out.
Or your deputies who work there, or the Department of Health Services employees who try to provide services. So that's why I think it's important that we have frank conversations.
What's going on with her voice now? Did she smoke some Pall Malls during the break?
It's possible.
So that's why I think it's important that we have frank conversations, that we don't.
She sounds like she had a tracheotomy.
Engage in the dangerous, perhaps biased perception of who the people are who benefit from zero bail, as opposed to who the people were who benefited from a bail system that was cash-based.
It is unbelievable that she got elected to that office.
Well, you got to remember who she ran against.
Well, Herb Wesson was a former Speaker of the Assembly, and he was in charge of the city council. I mean, everyone knew he had problems, but he has some degree of political acumen to get to those two places.
We have to be mindful of that.
You know, maybe we should get rid of the jail system entirely. Maybe we should just have parties with taco trucks for people that commit crimes.
We're doing whatever we can to get people to come. Tacos, balloons.
That's pretty much what she's advocating for.
We'll hear what she has to say about victims later on.
Now, breaking on AM 790 KABC.
We have breaking news coming out of the House of Representatives from the nation's capital. For more, here's Randy Wang.
Kevin McCarthy has been removed as the Speaker of the House. It's done. He's out. What happens next? Nobody knows.
He could be back in again very quickly. It could be someone else. Time will tell.
I believe the final vote tally was 216-210. It didn't need to get to 218 because there were a few members of Congress that were absent. I believe Nancy Pelosi, as you mentioned, is in San Francisco, and maybe there's one other one. But there were 6 Republicans that voted to remove McCarthy, and that's all that needed to happen because every Democrat decided, hey, we'll go ahead and remove McCarthy too. So what happens now? Who knows?
And no fire alarms were pulled.
Not yet.
Jennifer Van Laar, our pal from Red State, joins us at the top of the hour. Let's go ahead and work at a phone call here, Randy.
Let's go to Harold in North Hollywood. Harold, you're on the John Phillips Show. Hello.
Yeah, what is going on with your Republican Party? Now they just ousted, Kevin McCarthy. Is that the Republican Party of my parents? Or is this not a Republican Party anymore? Is it just a Trump party? I mean, we got to come to an agreement on which way this Republican Party is going to go. And right now, I'm a little concerned that they're all screwed up. Put it politely. What do you think?
Well, when they took the vote for Speaker, it took 15 rounds, Randy?
15 tries.
Okay. And it was extremely contentious. I remember that because it went on deep into the night, and you had to stay up late to figure out who was going to win what. And one of the things that Matt Gaetz, who opposed Kevin McCarthy becoming the Speaker, one of the things that he said over and over and over again to anyone who was paying attention was he was going to get Kevin McCarthy. They made him agree to certain rules that would make it easy for Matt Gaetz to put together a cabal to take him out as Speaker. Because the majority was so thin, that's what Kevin McCarthy had to do to win the Speaker's gavel. That's what he did. And because Matt Gaetz said that he was going to get Kevin McCarthy, as soon as he was given the opportunity, as soon as he saw a green light, as soon as he saw an opening, that's exactly what he did. And when I look at this and I look at how this played out, I think to myself, this is exactly what's going on in New York, where you had a DA and you had an attorney general who both ran for office on the platform of getting Donald Trump, where if you elected them to their respective offices, they would use the power and authority of those offices to go after Donald Trump, which is exactly what they're doing. And because they're doing what they campaigned on, and because they are fulfilling the promise that they made to their constituents and their voters, support within the Republican Party is coalescing around Donald Trump because they know that what's going on in those cases is fundamentally unfair. And I think what you're going to see in the House of Representatives is everyone knows this is a vendetta that Matt Gaetz has against Kevin McCarthy. And I don't know the history of their relationship. So I don't know what caused Matt Gaetz to hate him as much as he does. Maybe it's personal. Maybe it's ideological. I don't know. But anyone who is watching this happen and anyone who's paying attention to what's going on understood that this didn't happen over one vote. This did not happen over one thing that happened recently. This is something that had been in the works for a long time.
And you're okay with that?
No, I would have voted to keep him.
Well, this stuff, you just went another direction. I mean, what is Matt Gaetz is in the minority of the party. Why is he dictating what the hell is going on with our I don't think it's my Republican Party anymore. Excuse me. Why is he dictating what should happen to Kevin McCarthy? What was going on in New York?
It's because the margins. It's because the margins are so thin. Why does Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema have a lot of say over what goes on in the Senate?
Razor-thin margins.
It's because the margins are thin. If you have a big majority, you don't have to worry about the outliers. If you have a thin majority, the outliers have a lot more power than they would otherwise have. Thank you for the call, sir. All right, we've got one more hour coming up on the John Phillips Show. Jennifer Van Laar joins us next. Don't you go anywhere. This is Talk Radio 790 KABC.
Hell no!